Good evening and welcome to this edition of Tok Piksa. Last week, women from all over the country gathered in the nation's capital for the second Papua New Guinea Women's Forum. Co-hosted by the United States Embassy in Port Moresby and the Department of Community Development, Youth and Religion, the forum was centered on forming and strengthening partnerships for the equality for women. This year's forum aimed to move forward the recommendations from last year's. Those recommendations were put into key areas of action where women's groups have been challenged to focus on.
The topic of gender equality is not a new one. In fact, recently there has been much discussion on equal opportunities for males and females in education, in the workplace, and in many other circles. However, as the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat Secretary General Dame Meg Taylor pointed out during the forum, statistics and social indicators show that Papua New Guinea is the worst performing when it comes to women. She said in this part of the world, the Pacific region receives more aid per capita than any other part of the world. But when you travel the Pacific, there is hardly anything to show for it.
And if you look at the statistics, particularly with regard to Papua New Guinea and the implication, particularly with the social indicators, we are the worst performing when it comes to women. Shame, shame, shame.
This is one of the reasons why last year the United States Embassy and the Department of Community Development, Youth and Religion decided to co-host the very first PNG Women's Forum to firstly point out, then prioritize and address the key areas that needed attention to strengthen gender equality at all levels. United States Ambassador Walter North said the forum aimed to facilitate the development of concrete results that will be used by all to advance gender issues in PNG.
Together, the United States and Papua New Guinea agree on many things. But one of the most important things that we agree on is that gender equality, empowering women and girls, and eliminating gender-based violence are among the most important things that we can do. We have made strides, but we have a long way to go. Each and every one of us must continue the fight to ensure the rights of women and girls everywhere, not just here in Papua New Guinea, but everywhere. Gender equality remains one of the world's unmet challenges. That challenge can be met head-on through political will, collaboration, and the theme of this forum, partnership. This partnership, demonstrated by all of you here today, became an inspirational theme stemming from the first Women's Forum.
This year, hundreds of women came from all over the country to attend the second PNG Women's Forum for more dialogue and to hold each other accountable to the progress of the previous year's recommendations and action plans. Ambassador North said PNG already has remarkable women leaders. What is required, though, is fewer barriers to empower these women.
I was thinking about this awesome audience. You are all women leaders. And in my head, I'm thinking, we don't need more women leaders. We need fewer barriers that prevent those women leaders from being successful. And so what can we do to empower those people who are already leading in their communities to become even more successful? And of course, we want new leaders too.
Since the 2014 forum, the U.S. Embassy has met regularly with women's groups, with PNG government representatives, donors and members of the private sector to distill the recommendations into key areas of action. For 2 months after the first forum, they met in subgroups by panel discussion topic and discussed all the recommendations from the panel discussions and the breakout sessions. Each subgroup presented 2 priority action items. The women were then challenged to choose the top actions on which they would work together over the next year. The women chose the following as their top issues: using mentoring to develop the next generation of women leaders, launching a nationwide campaign against gender-based violence, decreasing barriers to keeping girls in school, and using APAC to increase access to markets for PNG businesswomen. During last week's forum, Ambassador North challenged the women to deepen their partnerships for collaboration.
You're watching Tok Piksa. Whilst addressing the issues of gender equality and the challenges that still remain, the PNG Women's Forum also heard the achievements of women in various roles. Key speakers on the day of the forum were Dame Meg Taylor and Rear Admiral Carrie Thomas, two people who no doubt faced challenges as women but emerged as high achievers at the top of their spheres. Their stories are nothing less than inspiring.
There was an air of high expectations when Dame Meg Taylor stepped onto the podium, and she acknowledged that every person in the room had their own stories.
I'm going to give you my story, but before I do that, I want to acknowledge all of you and all the stories in this room, because I know that there are many and many, that each of you have your own stories. Mine is just but one.
She acknowledged that there were different generations seated in the room and that her main goal for telling her story was that if anything she'd done in her life could help anyone, then she'd left something behind, a legacy. She began her story as a young girl growing up in the village in what she described as a happy childhood in the Wagi Valley in the Western Highlands province.
So the earliest memories I have is the smell of smoky fires and big pig feasts in the Wagi Valley with my grandparents and my clansmen and clanswomen and all the children playing with the stomach of the pig.
She talked about some of the past roles she held in her professional life which have influenced where she is presently. For her, she said the public sector or working in government was always important. Dame Meg also worked in the private sector. She said working, particularly at the time of self-governance and independence, had tremendous impact on how she saw the world and how her future was shaped. She talked about the commitment of the 8-point plan, which preceded the Constitution in the early days and aimed for the development of women in the economic and social agenda.
But it was the 8-point plan that kept all of us on our toes. And many people, young people, don't know what the 8-point plan was. It preceded the Constitution and our national objectives. But the 8-point plan had a very specific point with regard to the development of women, particularly in the economic and social agenda, which had a tremendous commitment at the early days of independence.
In the public sector, Dame Meg worked as the public solicitor in Mount Hagen, and in the private sector, she worked as a lawyer and on the boards of civil society organizations and the boards of large private sector companies, all fashioned the way she taught and the way she made certain decisions. As she reflected on her life, Dame Meg said there were turning points or events that shaped her that were more profound.
Then when high school came and there weren't the schools, sent off to Australia and then being expelled from school. And you're not allowed to ask me why. No, I just helped myself to everything in the orchard because that's what I did at home, so I was constantly punished for that. And then coming home and creating havoc in the kitchen one night with my siblings, and my father, who never raised his voice, walked in and asked what the ruckus was all about, and then said, "And as for you, Meg, you're a failure." And I remember thinking, I'll show you.
At the University of Papua New Guinea, Dame Meg was one of those elites who rubbed shoulders with the country's influentials.
The Pangu Party meetings and the beginning of the political consciousness, the Bully Beef Club that had been set up with Michael Samari, Owala Rarua, Sess Abel, there's Maori Kiki. Huh? And then the meetings at UPNG and getting us to think about what it was going to be like for the transition, or if there was going to be ever self-government and independence. It was an exciting time. Then, having finished university in Melbourne, where I had a scholarship, and come back and work with Sir Michael Somare, who was then just Michael Thomas Somare, and he had his car and it was called M1. And it was just a little white Mazda that used to go through Moresby. The debates on the Constitution at the House of Assembly and the painful discussions around citizenship, and those who are of biracial descent like me, that we would be denied citizenship, and John Momas at the very heart of those debates. But to watch the skill of Michael Thomas Somare at self-government in the way he would be able to build consensus, I couldn't have asked for a greater teacher for the life that lay ahead of me.
She also talked about her current role as Secretary General of the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat.
When it was said that it wasn't the time for a Papua New Guinean to hold this position, I just want to assure you, as I did on television last night, is that we have every right to have that position.
She talked about the Pacific Island Forum, which consists of 16 Pacific Island countries. She said that after the last coup, Fiji was suspended from the forum, and last year, the leaders of the forum lifted the suspension and welcomed Fiji back into the fold. However, Fiji has chosen not to come back into the fold. She said it is not easy living in a country where this political tension continues to exist.
However, I acknowledge Fiji for taking seriously its responsibility towards the Pacific Island Forum as our host country, and have kept the lines of communication between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Pacific Island Secretariat open.
Dame Meg said in September this year, all the Pacific leaders will be in Papua New Guinea between the 7th and the 11th for their annual meeting. She said it is very important for PNG because at this time there will be a shift in the way issues will be discussed at the forum. One of the issues will be on the huge amount of aid the Pacific receives. She said there will be a shift in the agenda and a paradigm regarding aid.
In Majuro in 2013, the leaders met with Sir Makere, and he addressed them and virtually said to them, "You have to step up and take responsibility for what happens in this region. Not the donors, not other development partners, which we understand we need, but the leadership of the region must take responsibility for the regional issues for this region." As a result of that, we now have the framework for Pacific regionalism. I am tasked with ensuring that this year we implement that.
The other keynote speaker was Commander of the 14th Coast Guard District, U.S. Coast Guard, Rear Admiral Carrie Thomas.
A 6-year-old of a student at a school in which our Coast Guard provides all the Christmas presents for this school because many of them cannot afford them. And so this little 6-year-old looks at me and he goes, "What's the Coast Guard?" And I said, "That's a really good question." I said, "Do you like clean oceans or dirty oceans?" And they said, "Clean oceans." And I said, "And that's right. And your Coast Guard keeps the ocean clean. And if it gets dirty, we're going to go out and clean it up." I said, "Now, what happens if your boat gets a hole in it?" And they said, "It's going to fill up with water and sink." And I said, "That's right. And so you call the Coast Guard and we're going to come save you." And then I asked them, "Are drugs good or are drugs bad?" And they said, "Drugs are bad." I said, "And that's right. And the Coast Guard is the police. And so if you have drugs on your boat, we're going to stop you and arrest you and take you to jail." And this other little kid looks at me and he says, "My cousin has drugs and he's not in jail." It was a very awkward moment. I didn't know whether to take his name down. But I tell that story because I think that there's things that we all agree upon in this world. And I'm meeting with a number of my counterparts while I'm here. But we agree that we want clean oceans. Because as the oceans rise, it's important to preserve the environment. And Papua New Guinea and the nations of the Pacific Island Forum have really demonstrated that commitment. We agree that we want to save lives, and saving lives at sea is one of the most universally agreed upon principles, because even countries that are at odds militarily and diplomatically can agree to come together to save lives.
Welcome back to Tok Piksa. The PNG Women's Forum was all about partnership. All the presentations, the panel discussions, and the expos were aimed at sharing information so that everyone in the different sectors could identify where they come in to address the various priority areas highlighted.
One of the major highlights of the three-day forum was the panel discussions. Department Head of the Department of Community Development, Youth and Religion, Anna Solomon, said the government is playing its part by putting in place policies that give prominence to gender issues. She said that part of the implementation of these policies was for women at home to exercise gender equality with their families.
Right in your home. Don't stereotype your jobs at home. You know, don't think that when time to cook or rice you send your daughter, and time to do the laundry you send your daughter, and then you come to a work environment and you're talking gender equality and telling your son that you can be this or telling your daughter that you can be that. Start in the home, you know. Let you just share the roles, you know, equally. Everybody's going to be busy later on in future, and our mother's gonna come home and, you know, cut the firewood. Father's gonna come home and cook the food. He's gonna clean his, you know, baby diaper and all that. So we must start at home.
She said Papua New Guinean women are a strong and resilient group. She said despite the remoteness of many unit families from basic government services, local women still manage to provide and care for their families.
Our mothers are strong women. They've kept communities and families going despite government services, and they must be commended. They are gardeners, they are, you know, children bearers. They can do everything, you know, all at the same time. And, you know, all of us here, children, male children, girl children, we must all appreciate our mothers. Yeah, we must appreciate them.
During the forum, panel discussions touched on PNG's international commitments to strengthen women's rights. Much of the discussions focused on the implementation strategies PNG was using. With the United Nations Millennium Development Goals due this year, President of the PNG Council of Women, Teresa Jane Tong, said more needed to be done on the ground where the majority of the women live in communities.
National Council of Women, we would like to see all these conventions addressed, because those are the issues we've been fighting for, and it has to be supported by the critical mass, and critical mass must also understand the information must go out. Yes, I think there's going to be some sessions here, but I'd like to see awareness, a lot more awareness, and if donor funders, donor partners can support, then that will be good, because the women are at the forefront. They can address it. The social structure is there, we're coming from the family. Yeah, we want Papua New Guinea to be a good place for all.
The issues of access to education for girls and the damaging results of violence against women still need much attention. Prime Minister Peter O'Neill was not at the forum as he was attending an Australia PNG Business Council event. However, in a statement, he said a man of strength is one who never resorts to violence against women. He said everyone must respect the rights and safety of women in the community. The forum engaged the women in a lively conversation during a panel discussion on what is being done to increase financial literacy for women and to increase opportunities for them to own and operate businesses in PNG. Participants also talked about how the SME policy will improve the business climate for women. President of the PNG Women's Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Avia Khoisen, said the chamber discussed the policy and found it dissatisfactory in terms of catering for the interest of small and medium entrepreneurs for